David Stiles. He's gonna be speaking about Higo Kinko.
Yeah, and in particular, I'll be discussing the Tsuba that I brought here. It's kind of over there. It is it's a soft metal Kinko Tsuba, and it was sold to me with the seller attributing it to Hirata Hikozo. Quite a quite an attribution. And what was interestingly enough, when I purchased it at the Chicago show, I later found out at the San Francisco show that it actually had MBTHK Hozon papers, and so I was given the Hozon papers, and I also decided to do this presentation as kind of a continuation on an article that I wrote for the JSSUS newsletter, which was about the history of the Hirata school. So, okay, just to give a little bit of introduction, information about the Hirata school. When we refer to the Hirata school or the Hirata Yuha, what we're talking literally about is just two generations of artists that created Tsubas. And the first generation used the name exclusively Hirata Hikozo, and the second generation who also used the name Hirata Hikozo as the artist's signature, or as the art name, but we refer to him as Shosam Boro, okay, and he was the second generation. As I was saying, the Tsuba in question that I brought here was attributed to be the work of the first generation Hirata Hikozo. And just to describe some basic characteristics of the Tsuba, with the intent to link these Kante attributes to work by the first generation, or not. So basically the metal of the Tsuba itself, the Jigane is Yamagane, is Yamagane. It's unrefined copper. The overall shape is a special type of mokogata called Juji mokogata, which means it actually has the shape of the 10 kanji for 10. And the rim itself is a style, and it has a shape that's been raised and worked off. So what that essentially means is that it's kind of crudely raised and then kind of worked off into a high area. And this is called Tsukino Koshi Mimi. So this is the style of rim. And also the whole surface of the Tsuba has been treated in such a way with additional heat treating that has caused the design to kind of soften and almost give it like a glazed ceramic type appearance. Okay. So we kind of described the Tsuba. Now I'm going to talk about of course, the person who I purchased it from note. He cited that it was signed by a Tagane-me, which is a chiseled signature. Okay, and I wanted to compare what he called a Tagane-me of his Tsuba to like ones that have been papered that have a Tagane-me. Okay, and these two right here, one Tsuba has holes on, the other one has tokobetsu holes on to Hirata, and you can clearly see that there is a very distinct and deliberate chisel marks around the me. And this one actually, the Tsuba up on the far right, you can see it's been mounted a couple different times, and even with it being mounted a couple different times, the clear signature of the Taganeme, the chisel pattern was preserved quite well. And so these are kind of like very characteristic examples of a clear chiseled signature, okay? And this was a favored method that was used by Hirata Hikozo, because of the first generation, there might be only a handful of signed examples, and primarily he would sign it. If he did sign, he would sign it with a Taganeme signature. And kind of want to then talk about the rim of this Tsuba versus what you see in Hirata school. And that's where, as I studied lots of examples of published and papered Hirata school Tsubas, I start to see a kind of a trend. And the trend is that the rims, the style of rim that you most commonly see is some type of fukuren, okay, in these type of Tsubas, and which is a rim cover. And the first most common type is the Odawara fukuren, which is pictured right here to kind of show you the very characteristic shape and texture of these type of rim covers. And they were called Odawara because they were actually in the style of paper lanterns that were developed in that particular castle town. So that's how they got that name associated with them. And then to a lesser extent, you do see the Namawame fukuren, which is the rim covers that looks like interwoven rope type texture, okay? And I did a survey of like, you know, I would say close to 50 or 60 Tsubas that I had in my reference books, and photographs that I've collected over the years, and also talking with other collectors who own some of these Tsubas. And I found that the Odawara fukuren was the most common style of rim, okay? And when I didn't see any fukuren, I would see either marugata or kakomimi koneko, or I would have a rounded rim or a squared rim that has some degree of rounding to it, okay? And this is in contrast to what this Tsuba clearly has, which is a different style of rim, okay? And I think that was the point where I started to say, okay, I don't think this Tsuba is done by Hirata Hikozo, because the rim style is very, very different, you know, very, very distinctly different than what you see in other Hirata school examples. And this kind of goes back into my summary. The Tsukino Koshi Mimi that you see on the Tsuba is not at all characteristic of the Hirata school, and it is either, because this school is kind of it wasn't very prolific, and there was really only 2 generations. There isn't a lot of Tsubas, and a lot of the published and papered examples that I was able to study just really did not show this style of rim. But you know, again, you can't say that there aren't some out there. I just haven't seen them or haven't observed them, so I'm going to say it was either not used or it was very infrequently used in Hirata school Tsubas. And also the Taganeme on this Tsuba versus what you see on Hirata, you know, when it is executed, it's executed very precisely, very cleanly, and very distinctly. And even with the over the course of hundreds of years of the Tsuba being mounted and remounted on different swords, you still had a conservation of that very deliberate pattern. And you don't see that here. Here it looks like the Tsuba was probably mounted a few different times on swords, and whatever pattern was there wasn't really conserved, and it was probably of a utilitarian nature. Also, I noticed that this application of heat treatment while it was frequently used in other Hirata Tsubas, it's a technique that wasn't specific at all to Hirata, and the design itself you see a lot in other schools, and also done by some independent artists as well. And this kind of brings back to my conclusion a little bit, that I kind of disagree with the previous owner's attribution that the Tsuba is the work of Hirata Hikozo. And based on the price that I paid, I would have gotten a heck of a deal. But get back to reality. Also based upon the material and techniques, I think the Tsuba was made by an independent craftsman who worked in Kumamoto, in Higo province, I should say, and more specifically Kumamoto, and probably worked inside the early Edo period, because the Jigane, the Yamagane, was rapidly becoming not as popular to use as a base metal, and by the mid-Edo period it was pretty much dropped, and it was supplanted by the use of refined copper, shakudo, and shibuichi as a base metal. So the fact that it is Yamagane does hint to the fact that it is probably early Edo period, or it may be even a little bit earlier than Edo period, but it's definitely not later. And this kind of goes back to what the MBTHK paper says, is that it attributed to Higo. And that kind of makes sense. It's definitely not an earlier Tsuba. It's definitely not Kodai because of the use of the Yamagane. But then while it has some characteristics of Hirata, it also has some other characteristics that really you don't see in Hirata, which kind of makes you think that the Tsuba was made by a very competent independent craftsman. And I know when Brent put out a large number of Higo Tsubas here, he actually has a section called Other Craftsmen that didn't fit into any of the real major schools, but were still being sponsored and subsidized by the Hosokawa daimyo. And this is why I put this picture here. This is Hosokawa Sansai. He was one of the big patrons that funded a lot of the artistic development early on in the Edo period, with establishing the Higo Koshurai and establishing Higo aesthetics that was heavily influenced by Riku and tea culture, and that a lot of those factors kind of drove the development and innovation of a lot of these Higo craftsmen. And in the case of this Tsuba, I think he probably sponsored as a separate Tsuba maker, as an independent Tsuba maker. So these are a list of some of the reference I used to put together this presentation. Any questions? And I just love this picture of Kiyo Kiyomasa. He was the daimyo that was in Higo before the Hosokawa came. So
I just have a question, maybe just to clarify something.
Sure.
You can go back to one of the earlier slides. You talk about Tagane Mei. I don't know if you're a serious fittings collector, I think you understand what it is, but if you're not, maybe you just point.
Yeah.
Tagane Mei, it's not really a Mei, it's punch marks.
It's punch marks with a chisel, because a Tagane is a chisel, and essentially it's the marking done with a chisel around the central opening, and it's always done around the central opening of the Tsuba, because all Tsubas have a central opening. It would be a Tsuba. And so this is where these pattern marks are achieved, and you can see here that all three of these examples, the signature is very clearly done. It's very clearly and very deliberately. And even this one, which has been mounted a few different times, and you can see these sekigane has been added to kind of fit it to a smaller blade, you can see that this pattern is still very well preserved. And I wanted to give you this as a good, 3 good examples of what a tagane is versus what you see here, which is not a tagane.
And different, if I can just clarify, different Higo Smiths had different counts of
Right.
like Higo, I don't know, has 6 and 6 or something like that. Other
Right.
ones had different counts. So
And they also use chisels of different shapes too.
Right.
So in this one they use Hirata would use very rounded chisels. I know also like for example, another school, and it's represented, the Kamiyoshi school, would use rectangular chisels. So as a kind of as a contrast, yeah.
there are no signed Higo, conventionally signed Higo.
Right. I've seen one, I think, that was made of iron. I think might have been attributed to the 2nd generation. Yeah.
And there's only one, this famous one, which is signed Higo and Hikoso, which is still discussion about if it's authentic or
Okay.
not.
Yeah, I think I came across that one. Yeah, I came across that one in, I think it might be in Ito's book.
It's a very plain iron. I think it only has open work of like 1 round element.
Yeah,
It's supposed to be a star.
Right. Yeah, and I think you actually can see it in Ito's book. So on one of my first references there. So I did come across it. But again, yeah, it's extremely rare. And the Hirata school were direct retainers of the Hosokawa. So they were tasked with doing precious metal appraisal and sword fittings making. And then after the 2nd generation, they switched to just doing the appraisal of precious metals, and kind of oversaw other craftsmen that worked in you could say almost a Hirata style. so you actually see a lot of Hirata style stuff floating around in Edo period Higo province, because later on the Hirata school oversaw those later artisans, and artists. Any other signature or any other signatures? Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, well done. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.